Morning. Today's scripture reading will come from 1 Peter 4, 8 through 10.
1 Peter 4, 8 through 10. This is the English Standard Version. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Please be seated.
So when we started or introduced the discipline of fasting, I mentioned in that first lesson in that series, there are no commands about fasting in the New Testament. We're commanded to pray continually. We're commanded to give in keeping with our income. No direct commands, you must fast. We can't say that about the practice of hospitality. Now, not only are there verses in the New Testament that tell us that hospitality is one of the qualifications for serving as an elder, and you see that in 1 Timothy 3:2 and Titus 1:8, but there are at least three clear commands about the practice. Rob just read one of them to us. Romans 12 and verse 13, contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Hebrews 13, verse 2, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. 1 Peter 4 and verse 9, be hospitable to one another without grumbling. I'm sure over the next couple weeks we'll come back to some of these passages and say more about it. Before we dive into the discipline, I think we need to define the word. It's interesting. It's an interesting word. It's a combination of two Greek words. The word philo, love. We see that. I think most of us know Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. That's what the first part of the word means. Xenia, that's not a word that just jumps out at us. It's the word for stranger. And when you put those two words together, the basic meaning of hospitality, to be a lover of strangers, to love strangers. And as you think about the three passages that we just read together, God says to us in His Word, don't neglect. Sometimes we know that we're supposed to be kind and welcoming and love strangers, but we neglect to do what we know we should do. We're commanded to seek to show love to strangers. Look for those opportunities. We're going to say more about that. And we should do it without grumbling. I always think about a proverb that, you go and you're eating at your neighbor's house and it says, he tells you, eat, but his heart's not with you, You're eating my food. Show love to strangers, but do it without grumbling. Do it with a joyful attitude. Now, as we think about this practice, I want you to think in terms of how do we do that when we assemble for Bible class and worship. And I just want to kind of set the tone for what it might feel like for some people to walk into a building like this. A couple weeks ago, I needed to replace a light bulb. Now, to you, that may seem like a very simple thing. Have you ever been to Lowe's? There's an aisle with about 10,000 light bulbs. And you will never find your preacher more out of his comfort zone than for me to walk into a hardware store. I don't know what I'm looking for. I don't know where to find it. I just feel so uncomfortable. The people who were supposed to help were too busy to be bothered. I mean, they just didn't seem interested in my light bulb emergency at all. They sent me a couple of teenagers. I'm going to guarantee you they knew less about it than I did. I couldn't read the little writing that was on the light bulb. They couldn't read it. They didn't know what I was looking for. I got frustrated. I'm going to tell you, I was embarrassed. I didn't want to need help finding a light bulb, and I just walked out. Dead light bulb in hand. And I drove over to Home Depot, and an elderly guy that worked there took me directly to what I needed. He said, I know what you need. Come with me. Took me right to it. Help me find, there were about a dozen that looked like the one I had in my hand. He goes, you don't want that. This is the one you want. And then he walked with me to a couple other places, helped me find a few other things that I was looking for. And when I left that store, I was on my way home, the thought occurred to me, there are people that walk into an assembly like this that feel the way I do when I go to a hardware store. They're coming because they need something. They're coming because they want something, but they don't know how to find it. And I'm just telling you, when they walk in, and I'm not trying to pick on either one of these stores, but I'm just telling about my own experience, that they're either going to have a Lowe's experience or they're going to have a Home Depot experience. They're either going to be undervalued, overlooked, ignored, or they're going to be welcomed and assisted. And I'm just going to tell you, I happened to look up and see the look on my father's face. He's so disgusted that I can't find a light bulb at hardware store. That was totally inadvertent. I just looked his way, and he looked absolutely disgusted. All right, that was free. So what's this going to look like for us to show hospitality to our visitors, right? The first thing I want you to think about is be intentionally aware. And that's absolutely something that Jesus models. We look at his life, and Jesus is always intentional. It's on purpose. He doesn't accidentally look and find people. He's looking for people that are looking for him. He's looking for people that have needs so that he can meet that need. And we're going to look at about 2 or 3 examples of what we're talking about. In John 6 and verse 5, lifting up his eyes then, seeing a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus says to Philip, where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat? Matthew 9, 35 and 36, Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, healing every sickness and disease among the people. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion for them. They were weary, they were scattered, they were like sheep that didn't have a shepherd, right? So Luke chapter 7, verses 11 through 13. Now it happened the day after that he went into a city called Nain. Many of his disciples went with him. There was a large crowd. When he came near the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother. She was a widow. A large crowd from the city was with her. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and he said, do not weep. And finally, Luke 19, starting in verse 1, when Jesus entered and passed through Jericho, behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, who was a chief tax collector. He was rich. He sought to see who Jesus was, but he could not because of the crowd, for he was of short stature. So he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was going to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up, and he saw him, and he said, Zacchaeus, make haste, come down, for today I must stay at your house. When Jesus was in a crowd, when he was surrounded by a multitude of people, he had a habit of scanning the crowd. That idea of your head is on a swivel. You're just looking to see who is around you. He could tell when people were hungry. He could tell when people were weary. He could tell when they were grieving. Jesus could tell when people were seeking him. In fact, Jesus was looking for people that were looking for him. He was intentionally aware. He lifted up his eyes. You know, it's easy to ignore other people, and sometimes it's easy to get annoyed by people. They come into your space. Sometimes they sit in your pew. There's this old leadership magazine, and everybody in the church was looking at the visitors thinking they don't know whose seat they just sat in. With fear and trepidation, what's going to happen They've sat in somebody else's pew. Hey, don't be annoyed. Don't ignore people. Jesus refused to do that. And if we want to practice hospitality, we're going to have to be like Jesus. I've thought a lot about this. When people walk into a place like this, there's something driving them. There's a reason they got out of bed on Sunday morning and drove to a place of worship. And sometimes, because we're so at home here, we don't know how difficult it is to walk into a building full of strangers. They might be hungry, weary, grieving over a painful loss. That most likely, what brings them, what draws them to this place is like Zacchaeus. They would like to see Jesus. And if we're going to practice hospitality, love the strangers that visit us, the least we can do is try to be aware of their presence, to try to get outside of our own problems and to do our best to recognize the burdens that other people are carrying. I think we're almost always surrounded by opportunities to practice a love for strangers. You can be oblivious. Some people intentionally kind of put on blinders. They just have their own needs, their own desires. But I'm encouraging you, be intentionally aware. I think Jesus did that, and I want to be like him. Number 2, affirm the value of every person. When you read the gospel accounts that tell us about the life and ministry of Jesus, it's hard to overlook the fact that, and this is shocking, but so often religious people got in the way of those who were trying to get to Jesus. When the disciples found Jesus talking to the woman at the well in John 4:27, they marveled that he was talking to a woman. They couldn't understand why he was talking to a Samaritan woman who had been married 5 times and was now living with a man who wasn't her husband. It didn't make sense to them why Jesus would bother with a person like that. On another occasion, his disciples rebuked people who were trying to bring little children to Jesus. Dale just preached on this a couple weeks ago on Sunday morning. Jesus had to tell his own disciples, don't you hinder people who are trying to get to me. Wouldn't that be a terrible thing? To be a follower of Jesus that gets in the way of others who are trying to get to Jesus. When a blind beggar is calling out for mercy, those who led the way rebuked him and told him to be quiet. And finally, when tax collectors and sinners gathered around Jesus, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they muttered, they kind of grumbled, this man welcomes sinners and he eats with them. When strangers come into this building, we don't have the right to devalue them because of their age, their gender, their race, any special needs that they might have, their background or track record of sinfulness. Jesus valued little children. He valued Samaritans and women, the blind, the deaf, the crippled. He welcomed sinners and he ate with them. Showing hospitality to strangers who visit requires that we affirm the value of each person, that we treat them with kindness, that we show respect. Jesus interacted with a lot of people, and somehow he found a way to be comfortable in their presence, and I think they loved him because he showed value. He valued each person. And you know that the part of the challenge loving strangers, loving people we don't know, is it's easy to be dismissive. We find some reason not to love, not to welcome. Don't do that. Jesus saw value in every person, and I think I'm preaching to people this morning who want to be like him. The third thing is be proactive. And that just means creating or controlling a situation by taking the initiative. A lot of times we wait for people to come to us, and don't wait for people to come to you. You go to them. Instead of waiting, for our visitors to make the first move, don't do that. It's so interesting to me, Great Commission passages like Matthew 28:19, go make disciples of all nations, or Mark 16:15, go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation. If we're supposed to go into all the world, can't we walk across the auditorium? You spot somebody you don't recognize, can't you walk from one side of the foyer to the other and be proactive? I think sometimes we worry about things. I've welcomed visitors before that were members of this church, and that's kind of embarrassing, right? But would you be uncomfortable so that they don't have to be? Do you understand that? You be proactive. You make the first move. Reach out to people. When you value people and are intentionally aware, not just of their presence, but the potential needs to be welcomed and assisted. Listen, when I say be proactive or take the initiative, some people are more introverted than others. We're afraid to make a mistake, say or do the wrong thing. But being proactive means doing simple things. Greet people you don't recognize. Introduce yourself. Welcome them with a few friendly words. Show interest. Answer questions. Guide them to class or worship. And introduce them to other people, especially people that they might have something in common with. And then tell them about other things that are going on here, fellowship meals or class gatherings or youth functions or events like our community breakfasts or our recovery groups. I think it can be difficult for some people to walk into a place of worship, and we want to do everything we can to make sure that they feel welcomed and wanted and appreciated. If they have the courage to show up, we should have the courtesy to welcome them and help them find the spiritual resources they need. Be proactive. The last one is so simple. Just practice the golden rule. Jesus in Matthew 7:12, this is something everybody can understand this. He said, so in everything do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. We call it the golden rule. It's simple. You think about the way that you want to be treated, and then that's how you treat other people. What would you want someone else to do for you if you walked into a building like this? Now, the only one that we're not going to try to encourage, some of you are like, I'd like everybody to leave me alone. Well, that ain't going to happen. We're going to welcome you. Listen, I've jokingly told people, if you visit us, it's going to feel a little bit like a hostage situation. I mean, we're going to meet you. We're going to introduce you to people. We're going to be friendly. We're going to try to get to know you. We have a member of this congregation that there was a medical issue. One of her loved ones, she was worshiping, not with us, in another congregation, a different town in Oklahoma. She talked about going, to church in that community, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. Nobody welcomed her. They didn't ask, why are you here? Is there anything we can do to help? And so going through kind of a crisis in her family, showing up at a local congregation, and basically being ignored. Can I tell you why I think that happens? A lot of us think we're friendly. It's a friendly church, right? Because we're friendly to the people we already know. But really being a friendly church means that we are also extremely accommodating and welcoming to the people we don't know, and making sure that they feel welcomed, that we minister to them. So here's what that sister does. Anytime somebody walks into this building that she doesn't know, she's going to go introduce herself, ask who they are, what they need, and is there anything she can do to help? Or if she's in worship setting like this and sees someone she doesn't recognize and they're sitting alone, she will immediately get up and go sit with that person. Why would you do that? Well, because she's put thought into what she would like others to do for her. And so that's what she's doing for others. She's practicing the golden rule. And I think if we're going to show hospitality, we're going to have to think in terms of what would I appreciate? How would I want people to welcome me? And help me when I walk into a place and I'm actually here for help. How do I want to be assisted? How do I want to be treated? Once you can answer that question, what you would want someone else to do for you, then you do that for them. There's a story. Philip Jenkins has a book called Lunch Ladies. It's about teenagers and helping youth groups to be kind of more welcoming to each other. And there was a story about a lady named Esmond Green. The headline, The Tragic Death of Esmond Green. And I'm just going to try to tell you what happened. She went into this hospital and she had some mental health issues. And because she was behaving kind of erratically and they had a little bit of a track record, she sat in that hospital for 24 hours and nobody helped her. And at one point she had a medical emergency. I think she had a heart attack. There's actually a video that I don't suggest that you watch it. She falls out of her chair and is on the ground in that emergency room, waiting room. A guy in a kind of a swivel chair, he wheels around and looks and just kind of shakes his head and wheels. And she died on the floor of the emergency room waiting area. Nobody cared. They just reached the conclusion. It was a hospital that catered specifically to people that were having emotional, psychological problems, and they thought, well, she's just acting crazy. She went to a place that the sole purpose for its existence was to help people in crisis. And she died being totally overlooked and ignored. Now, there's a spiritual application to that. I think that people come to a place like this because there's a great spiritual need. And they believe that if they come to a place like this, filled with people like us, that we will know how to minister to them in their crisis and bring them to Jesus. Now, how horrible would it be to make the effort to get up and go into a place that it's hard for you to do. You don't know anybody, but you know that in that building they have the answers. They know Jesus. And then to be totally ignored, overlooked, just dismissed. We can't let that happen. That should never, ever happen. We're going to practice a love for strangers. We're going to be intentionally aware. We're going to value every person. We're going to be proactive. We're going to practice the golden rule. I think you do such a good job of that. But it's good to go back and review and just to kind of be reminded. That's part of how we can practice the discipline of hospitality. It's not just thinking about your best friends in the congregation and saying we're going to have lunch with people that we love and people that we know. I think that's part of it. But really, I think at the heart of it, hospitality is about how we treat people that we don't know. People that we're going to encounter as they are trying to find their way into relationship with God. And I'll just say this as we conclude. If you are visiting with us this morning, But what we want you to know more than anything else is that there is a God. He does love you. His Son died for you. And that what you're looking for, and maybe you haven't been able to find it any place else, meaning, hope, peace, joy, purpose, you can find all those things in Jesus. And we really want you to know Him. If we can help you with that, we offer a public invitation. If you want to come publicly, we invite you to do that. If you want to talk to us privately, we're open to that. But at this time, if there's some need that you have and we can help you, we're inviting you to come as we stand and sing.